Hello everyone, today we'll be covering the HackTheBox active machine. This machine covers a lot of Windows and Active Directory attacks, and hopefully this walkthrough will help you, for those who are preparing for the OSCP, kind of improve your methodology and maybe not only from an OSCP standpoint, but also from someone who already has experience in the field and from an internal pentesting experience standpoint. So yeah, without further ado, let's get to it. So I already had some of the previous commands that I ran, so I'll clear out my terminal right here. So like everything, we begin with enumeration on the target. So the first thing we'll do is, utilize your favorite network scanner, whatever that is. I prefer ResScan, just simply how fast and efficient it is. So if we fire it off like this, we'll see a bunch of services that are already coming back, a bunch of ports that are already coming back as open. And just with this information, we can infer a lot of things about the target. So for example, we have 488, 135, 139, 389, 445, which will kind of tell you that it's likely a Windows computer. And as you can see here, because Kerberos is enabled and LDAP, there's also another indicator that is domain controller. So this information is very useful, and you absolutely want to take a note of it as you're going through these. Let me erase this. And typically, what you want to do is kind of enumerate each port and service individually. So that would be, then the next step that I would take is utilize netexec or crackmapexec to identify at least the NetBIOS name and just gain additional information about the target. So for example, we see here that the NetBIOS name is called DC, which once again kind of validates our um, initial assumption that this might be a domain controller. And we also have this operating system version, which is very outdated. So that's absolutely something we'll take a note of and we'll have ready to go for um, further attacks that we want to conduct. So we also see that the domain is active to hack the box. So this is also other information that we want to take note of. So we put that in here. Typically, I'll do something like this. And here we have the domain name, we have signing true, and we have SMBP1 set to false. So there's a couple of things we can do for each port that is open, and we'll kind of run you through some of the attack vectors associated with these services. So with DNS, there's not a whole lot you can do. With Kerberos, there's a lot of attacks that you can explore from an authenticated standpoint. So you might start conducting SREP roasting attacks. So an SREP roast attack is pretty much whenever an Active Directory account does not have Kerberos pre-authentication enabled, it allows you to automatically request a TGT or a ticket granting ticket for that specific account. And with this ticket, if the user's password is weak, you might be able to decrypt it using Hashcat or some sort of offline brute forcing tool, and be able to then utilize those credentials and impersonate that specific user. It is highly unlikely for this to happen, but in some of these boxes you might see that. So that's one attack vector that you absolutely should explore. And should absolutely take a note of before going forward. The other attack vector that you have with Kerberos is username enumeration or username validation. So another thing you want to do is build up a user list. Typically, there's some out online that I'll link and showcase right now that will have an extensive, like maybe like 13K list of all of some randomly generated, not randomly generated, but most common, statistically high likely usernames to appear in domains. And you also have, after you go through your open source intelligence process and you gather information about the organization, you should have already a list of some potential email addresses or accounts that you can then utilize against Kerberos and validate those users with a MSRPC. If you have, from an authenticated standpoint, you only have a null authentication enumeration. So if you're able to utilize a null bind to RPC, you might be able to extract sensitive data about the host or the domain. NetBIOS, and you can't do any much of that. With LDAP, pretty much the same thing. If the LDAP server allows null binds or some sort of anonymous access, you might be able to extract domain information. So this might look like usernames, groups, descriptions. Usually descriptions is something you should also audit since they might contain passwords that you can then utilize to impersonate or um, conduct maybe password sparing attacks. So with LDAP and Kerberos, you're able to pretty much validate usernames and well, more with Kerberos. So it's typically what you also want to do after building your entire user base and validating those users, you want to conduct password sparing attacks. And you pretty much rinse and repeat. You usually want to spray maybe a password every 4 hours or so, depending on the domain's password policy. But that's pretty much all you can do through with an authenticated standpoint. So just to reiterate, we have null binds, we have username validation, and then we could also take a look at technical vulnerabilities. So for example, in this case, we see that the Windows version is set to Windows 7 2008. So the first thing that I would do is just literally look up this version right here and go here and I look it up online and just see if we can find any publicly available exploits. And yeah, the first thing that will come up is this exploit, which is MS17 or Eternal Blue, which is a very critical vulnerability that allows you to gain administrative access on a host. Typically, during a pen test, you actually don't want to utilize this exploit is typically because it has a chance of blue screening the machine that you're attacking. So typically during actual pen tests, you kind of want to stay away from these exploits and just make sure the client is aware that they are potentially vulnerable to it, but you can't validate the vulnerability unless obviously maybe the client verbally tells you that you can. So that's it. So now that we have that information, we'll go through each protocol and I'll kind of focus on actually on the high action items. So since the device is a domain controller. You also want to test for vulnerabilities like zero logon, which are not as common, but and I know it won't work in this case, but it's still good to be as thorough as you can. So while we wait for MSF console to load, there's also publicly available exploits. Um, these are not the exploits that you can find on Metasploit. You can also find it in GitHub somewhere. There's tons available, but just for the sake of demonstration, since I know this won't work, so you do use 24, set our host 10, 10, 10, 100, and we'll do run. As you can see, it fails. So that means that this machine is not vulnerable to MS17. So that's good. That's good on them. So typically, I want to note that and say not vulnerable to MS17. Save that. Go back here, and we'll say search zero logon. We'll utilize 3. Set our host 10, 10, 10, 100, and then we'll do check. Oh, set MB name. That's also another information that you need, and we already have it here. So I will do a check. Oh, apologize. Okay, sir. So while that is running in the background, we can also start enumerating other services. So we'll go into Kerberos. So like I said, you can utilize this tool called Kerbrute. And with the following command, if you specify the domain controller, the domain that you're attacking, and then you feed it a list of usernames, you'll be able to validate a user account, which you can then utilize a list of passwords and conduct password spreading attacks against it. So that's also something that I'll take a note of. And now we know that the user administrator exists, which is typical, nothing new. Then we have MSRPC. So like I said, there's not a lot we can do. Typically with a user enum flag, if an account is vulnerable to password roasting, it will automatically return it here. It will automatically return the specific hash for that specific user or Kerberos ticket. So we don't really have to do that. Let's see if this scanner's done. So as we can see here, the target is vulnerable to zero logon. So that's absolutely something that you want to note. And now you can, pretty much set the password. This is a very critical vulnerability because it allows you to set the password to null. And I know this is not the intended attack path for this specific vulnerability, for this specific machine, but it is something that you absolutely can take a note of and it should take a note of during a pen test and attempt to exploit it. So we'll say show options, set So pretty much you can set the administrator's password to an empty the domain controller's password to an empty value, which will then allow you to authenticate as that domain controller, and then dump all the credentials for that specific domain controller. Since domain controllers by themselves have the ability to replicate credentials across the domain with the desysync permission. I'm not going to showcase that simply because that's not the point, but that's something you absolutely can explore and should explore. Yeah, let's enumerate MSRPC from an unauthenticated standpoint. So, like I said before, the only commands you can issue are um, null sessions. That's the only thing that you can try to enumerate. And as you can see here, none of the commands are going to work simply because that's good on the client. That's good on this target. That's good. They're protected against RPC null sessions. The only thing that you can gather from this is the operating system, which itself is not really a vulnerability. Now we go to LDAP. So with LDAP, like I said, same thing. We don't have valid authentication, so the only thing we can do is try to authenticate using a null session and see if we can gain any access. As you can see here, nothing. So I would type something like null sessions available. And now we have 445, which is SMB. Typically the same thing. You can only do null sessions. It's not going to work here, but you can do something like an exec. You can utilize an exec to enumerate shares. It's not going to work as you can see, but you can utilize smbmap to do the same thing, and it should work. As you can see here, the replication share does have, we do have access, read-only access to the replication share as an anonymous or null, with an anonymous or null connection. So the next thing we want to do is explore that specific file share that we have access to. You can utilize a tool like ManSpider. ManSpider is really good since it automatically will pull files depending on their extension, their content, and their title. It's very useful. So for in this case, I already know that the file we're looking for is an XML file. So you issue this command and you'll see that it's able to authenticate and it will pull a file, this specific file, then you can open and you'll see here you have pretty much a group policy preference file. So based on the path, we can kind of infer that this replication share is actually a copy of the sysvol share, where the sysvol share contains all the group policy information about a domain controller within a domain controller. So in this case, we have the policy name, the machines and its preferences, and we see that the group's XML file is present, which is usually kind of a red flag, and will tell you that it will be another thing that you should note that, well, this only affects usually very outdated systems. So long time ago, when Microsoft actually leaked their own decryption key. So as you can see here, we have the name of the user and we have the C password, which is encrypted. And because they leaked the decryption key, we can actually just decrypt this file and basically retrieve the password for the active.HackTheBox that serves TGS account. So how will we decrypt that password? We utilize the GPP decrypt along with the string, which is the password that we want to decrypt, and we'll see that the password is actually GPP still standing strong. And now, now that you have some of it, now that you have a valid authentication, you can validate it with 10, 10, 10, then 100. We have service TGS, and the password is GPP still standing. Oops. Well, I believe, yeah, it's not going to work for some reason, but you can pretty much now go back now that you have authenticated access and pretty much kind of rerun your enumeration again and kind of explore these services as an authenticated user. So how can you exploit Kerberos from an authenticated perspective? So there are Kerberos delegation attacks that you can explore. There's multiple ways to enumerate that. You can also utilize identify accounts that have a service principal nameset, and then utilize a Kerberos attack to retrieve their TGS or the ticket granting service ticket, which is pretty much the same thing. It's just an encrypted ticket. Then if the user's password is weak, you can then decrypt and authenticate as that specific user. From RPC, you can issue the commands we previously issued, and we would be able to um, enumerate a bunch of information about the domain. So you utilize this specific kind of command, this specific command here. Let's see. I'm gonna have the commands ready at hand so that we can so that we can easily just get them and conduct these attacks. So right here, and then SMB. So now that we have, like I said, authenticated access to these services, we already went through how to enumerate the attacks that we could go against Kerberos. Also RPC, we can pretty much pull the domain information. Same thing with LDAP. We can get access to outbound domain object control. We have ability to read user object descriptions, um, their their group memberships, what group the user belongs to. I believe I just said the same thing like twice, but you get the gist. We can also, and then if we pivot to 445 and SMB, we can now potentially have access to these previously unavailable shares. So let's attempt to do it one by one. So we'll issue the following command. So is service TGS, and then the password was GPP still standing strong. As you can see here, we got access to a Kerberos ticket, which it's the administrator user, which is a red flag because this is probably a domain administrator account, and if it's Kerberoastable, it means they're likely fucked up. And if the user's if the user password is weak, we can potentially impersonate the administrator and pretty much have access to the entire domain. So this is a red flag. We'll have that noted in here, and we'll attempt to crack it in a second. We'll move on to RPC. Service TGS, and then password is GBP is still standing strong. So users. So now we can see that the users available are administrator, guest, KRBTGT, which is the Kerberos account that grants tickets to other accounts, and then we have a service TGS, which is the one that we're authenticating as. So it's good to know. We'll utilize this tool called linwinpwn. And authenticate. This user linwinpwn is just basically a suite of different tools pulled in together into a bash script, and it just facilitates the enumeration process because all these tools are, rather than having to run the commands individually, the tool will already run these for you. So another thing you want to do is enumerate LDAP, right? So we'll go to the Active Directory enumeration menu, and you'll utilize Bloodhound, ldapdomaindump, to see what information we can query from LDAP. So on base, it will fail because I think it's missing an argument, but we'll try the other ones and we'll try to run the other one manually. Since I already did run this, the results are already inputted here. So we'll go to domain recon, hold that domain dump, and then we can pretty much gather a lot of information about the domain. So for example, we have the same information, we have the name, what groups they belong to, and the description. So like I said, you want to look for all these descriptions and see if there's any exposed passwords that you could probably reuse. In this case, there's no passwords, but as you can see here, we now know that the administrator account belongs to the domain administrators and the enterprise admins. So that is good to know, which means that if we get access to this account, we pretty much gain access to the entire domain. So we'll utilize Bloodhound right now to further inspect the domain. So once the information is all queried up, I accidentally did it within the ldapdomaindump folder, but that's not going to matter. You're going to start up Bloodhound. I'll have an exact guide on how to do this. Potentially in the future, you want to go to administration, go to upload files. We'll go to the path where this is reciting, go domain recon, ldapdomaindump, and then you'll paste all this information in there and upload it. So then it will be ingested. Typically this takes a while, but you'll be able to, after you finish ingesting, then explore the permissions associated with all these accounts and view a escalation paths from your current user. So we'll move on to SMB in the meantime while that is happening in the background. Service TGS. So as you can see here, we have access to the sysvol share, read-only access to the users, sysvol, replication, and logon. So once again, you typically want to inspect these manually. So you go active the HackTheBox service.tgs, and then I forgot exactly how I said that you do. Oh, like this. Like this. There it is. So list help shares use users. So we have, as you can see, we can traverse. There's this file share that we have access to, and we can see the users folder within the machine. So you'll be able to, you see the user flag right here. Pretty much just leads nowhere, but during a pen test, you want to explore these shares individually, like with MinSpider too, and try to pull as much information as possible that you can view. Potentially, if they have any passwords exposed within these files, that's something that you can absolutely note of. So the first thing you want to do is utilize your user. You can mark it as owned, and then we can go to path finding, and we want to be administrator. So how can we do that? Path not found. Okay, so that means that you're unable to. Okay, but I want to query more information about the administrator user. I want to validate everything. So if we click on here, you'll see that it doesn't require, you get a lot of information about the host, about the specific account. So it's a built-in account for administrating computers and within domain, for administrating the computer within domain. It is a member of all these accounts. So we have domain admins, we have group policy owners, the group belongs to the domain users, and in terms, it has outbound object control on all these Active Directory objects, which do not serve us any purpose. We just know that this is a privileged account that we want to potentially compromise. So within this specific user, we also want to see what groups we belong to. Nothing out of the ordinary, and as you can see here, we actually don't have any outbound object control. Also, this Bloodhound would automatically come with ciphers and specific queries that will automatically enumerate some part of the domain for you. So as you can see here, we have all Kerberosable users, and we'll identify that the administrator user is actually Kerberosable, which because it has a service principal name set for this specific service, SIFs, which is earlier dialect of SMB. So that is good to know, and it's something that we already extracted. We already extracted it's the account's ticket. So now we attempt to crack it and see if we can retrieve the clear text password from this account. So we typically want to do hashcat users SPNs out text, and we want to copy this into a file and close without saving hashcat. You want to crack the hash. This is an offline cracking attack, and within a few minutes you should be able to crack it, depending how fast your GPU is. This is a virtual VM, so it might take a while. And as you can see here, we retrieve the account's password, which is Ticketmaster 1968. So now we want to validate whether this account is actually legit and whether we can authenticate as that user. So you could use netexec, or you could use SMB administrator, netexec or SMB maps. I apologize. Ticketmaster 1968. So we have admin access, as you can see here. We have read and write access over the admin share. We have read and write access over C file, the C share, replication, and all these others. So if we have access to to the admin S share like this, if you're once you rerun your enumeration process again, now that you find a new account, you can utilize psexec, which will write a service binary within the admin the admin $ share. Will start that service, and you'll be able to get command execution on the host as such. And you have elevated access now because this service, you are authenticating, you're pretty much authenticating as the permissions associated with that service that you started up. And because you're an administrator, you're starting the service as the authority system, which is the highest level of access you can have within a Windows host. So if you do who am I all, you can see you're part of the administrators. And now that you have administrator access, you can do something like you can utilize secrets dump, this, and we issue the password. And hopefully this works. But as you can see here, now you're able to, once you have administrator access over a domain controller, so if you have domain admin, in this case, we compromise the domain admin, your next step should be to dump all these hashes and then pass them around and using other tools to see what other hosts you can target. I'll go back to the other exploitation vector, which was, we identified was this one. So we want to remove the account's password with zero logon, and you'll see how this exploit works. I'll give it a second. Okay, successfully change the account password to this. So what do we want to do? We want to go back. We want to utilize secret stump. So we'll try to authenticate as that domain controller, which is, that's an FBO's name. That's it. That's sorry, the account's password. And we'll hit enter. And as you can see here, we get the keys to the kingdom again because like I said, domain controllers by default have the ability to replicate credentials across the domain, and therefore, if you have the ability to replicate domain credentials across the domain, and you set the account to the account's password to empty based on this technical exploit, you then be able to gather all the credentials of all the users within the domain, as you can see here. So that's pretty much it. I mean, this is as thorough as we can be for this specific machine. So hope that helps some of you, and hope you kind of understood the process for enumerating and identifying as many vulnerabilities as possible.